Please be seated. So, I thank so many people. There's a lot of wonderful faces in the room who I've come to know, who helped raise me, who helped shape my career. Family members, my sister Carla's here, my cousin Vicky's here, my high school principal, Bill Fisher. That's a wonderful surprise. Who doesn't look a day over 21. I'm probably still smarting that I never got a chance to be his valedictorian, but he did such a great job of raising the standards and of excellence at Taylor Alderdice, and I'm forever grateful for his guidance, his wisdom, his discipline. And Rod Doss, carrying the banner for the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the gold standards in the historically black press, and that stretches all the way back to the North Star and Freedom's Journal and Ida B. Wells and all of the wonderful papers along the way, and radio and television, to make sure that the stories that were not being told well about our communities are continue to be told. So thank you for that. And that also, by extension, Jerry Lopes, American Urban Radio Networks. And, I can't help but, Harold Hayes is here up front. My first internship was at KDK. I still have my button when I was an intern, and we used to give tours of the station. If you're at my house in Washington, if you step into the president's office at the National Press Club, there is no mistaking where I'm from. The folks at Visit Pittsburgh who brought so much paraphernalia and the videos and everything else from home, we framed some of those pictures. People walk in and say, "Oh yeah, Browns fans, Ravens fans don't stand a chance in my office." Even my vice chair, my board vice chair, Derek Wallbank, is here. He made the journey with me this morning on the plane. I really thank you for coming. We always kid each other because we've graduated from rival colleges, myself from Penn State and Derek from Michigan State. So you can imagine what the conversations are like about football Saturdays, which are well underway. I have two cousins, one playing for Pitt and one playing for Penn State. I know you're not supposed to split the baby on family, but sorry, my degree's from Penn State. So Bryson, I love him dearly, but he's the Pitt guy, and Sterling, he's the Penn State guy. So he's the one. Sterling was the one who got the homecoming visit when he was a freshman. But I think about so many things. I want to thank the Pittsburgh Black Media Federation, the reigning national chapter of the year of the National Association of Black Journalists, I might add. It was great to see that happen. The Women's Press Club, one of the oldest press clubs in the country. It's a great, wonderful historic tradition. The Press Club of Western Pennsylvania, of which I'm a dues-paying member. And the Online News Association of Pittsburgh. So there's so many parts of my life represented in this room. Any folks from the Post-Gazette in here? Now, when I was an intern at KDK, it was through the Inroads program, which is a minority internship program. But Inroads always has to have corporate sponsors of various sorts, and most of those are in business. So there was 99,000 business interns, and then there was me. So I was the sole journalism intern, and surrounded by all these business and engineering students. The Post-Gazette stepped up to sponsor my internship at KDK. So Matt Kennedy was my sponsor at the time, and Mike Watkins, who was the program director then at KDK, Art Greenwald, and so many other people that helped shape and made sure a precocious teenager from Homewood stayed on the straight and narrow. True story, I almost lost that internship. Because when you're young and you think you know everything, sometimes you get benched a little bit. But that you bounce back from those things because you learn from your mistakes and you learn how to move forward. And there's a funny little story, and Harold, you'll appreciate this. I was sorting tapes in the tape library as an intern, and Mr. Burwanger, the general manager, comes walking through the tape library with this very tall, imposing lady, and I'm looking down trying to sort things out. I said, "Jeff, I want to introduce you to somebody." And it looked like, she was rushed and having a bad day, and really wanted to leave. Well, it turned out that was Oprah Winfrey when she was launching her show, and she was looking down at me like, "Who is this kid, and why are you introducing me to him?" But it's not a bad thing. Some people have good days and bad. Oprah obviously went off to have great success. But that was a chance encounter while I'm sitting in a polo shirt and shorts at the bottom of a tape library, trying to learn the craft of journalism. But one of these days, maybe we'll cross paths again. We'll renew that encounter. But this is a wonderful town. I love being home. I'm deeply honored that you asked me to come, and returning the favor to the visit of Stacy and Kim and so many people that came, my sister who participated in my oath of office. And if you know anything about the sense of the history of the Press Club, National Press Club, it's the symbols that I was trying to send in that moment is that most of you, of course, have heard the Emmett Till case. And the gentleman who helped break that story was Simeon Booker. He was the second person admitted up until 1955. The National Press Club did not admit African Americans, and until 1970 did not admit women. So he was in 1956. He became the second person. The first one was Louis Laudier of the Atlanta Daily World. But a gentleman named Frank Holman, and we have a lounge named after him at the club, who successfully fought to integrate the club and eventually brought in both Louis and Simeon. Well, leap forward after half a century career at Ebony and Jet, and now in wonderful retired status, at the ripe young age of 98, sat up on that stage, held the Bible that my late mother gave to me one birthday many years ago, and helped, as my good friend Eric T. Washington, who's the chief judge of the D.C. Court of Appeals, administered the oath of office. So that was me sort of tipping my hat to the bridge that carried me over. It's not possible to have me in this post without people who can kick down the door and allow me to walk through it. So I know where I come from, and I know the city I come from. Now, 3,000 members of the National Press Club know what city I come from. Because when you walk in, and I was raised in Homewood Rushton on Monticello Street down in Virginia, because they have Thomas Jefferson's home say Monticello. So there's a debate about pronunciation. But yeah, I grew up in the times where we're winning all the championships. Three River Stadium was still standing. Myron Cope on the radio. The Terrible Towel was young. Roberto Clemente, Manny Sanguin, Willie Stargell, whose son I went to Alderdice with while Mr. Fisher was principal. And so many great memories, going to the zoo and Crawford Grill. I mean, obviously I can spend a lot of time reminiscing, but that's not what you asked me to come here for. I always think about the last major speech I gave of this nature was the Penn State commencement address in 1999 at what's now the Greater Allegheny, formerly McKeesport campus. And then the message I was trying to give to the graduating class was, what are your values? What's most important to you? What are you going to carry with you? Something you can't buy. Something you can't ascend to in the corporate arena. And the values that shape you, the values at home that my parents did, that my larger family did, that friends, mentors, you name it. They did so much to take that, and I carried those lessons all these years later, now that I'm have spent now 50 years on this earth, and I was crazy enough and Derek and I laugh about this from time to time, and so my friends and relatives says, "What'd you do for your 50th birthday?" Well, I went to Barbados, then I went to Napa Valley, and then I got on a perfectly good airplane and jumped out of it at 13,000 feet. And just to show that I was still alive. And yes, I had a stiff drink when I got on the ground. But it was a lot of fun. But you don't get those kind of guts unless you come from a gutsy city. And Pittsburgh is just that. When I was inaugurated as National Press Club president, you saw snippets of it there. It was a lot of fun, but it came at a really strange time. The night of January 14th, other than the fact that I had a really bad cold that day, you could probably hear it in my voice. The thing that I was focused on was for 18 months. And when you really, quite frankly, look at it, for years before that, the environment of civility, generally speaking, was degrading. The environment for civic knowledge, degrading. The attitude towards freedom of the press, plummeting. That deeply concerned me the night I became president. And I tried to get across to the members and friends and family assembled that somebody had to stand up. Somebody had to say, no more. Somebody had to say, the Constitution matters. And that's what I did. For 9 months now that the big party is over, that's what I've been doing. I've been the standard bearer for protecting the Constitution. Because frankly, my official neighbor 2 blocks down from the club refuses to do so. And at least as it comes to freedom of the press. And some might argue other parts of the Constitution too, but that's not my lane. But the amount of, I tried to engender a sense of camaraderie that night, trying to bring the profession together, trying to rally the troops. Because when you take the podium, the nickname of the podium for the president, the Blue Goose, when you have that Blue Goose, when you have that bully pulpit, you have an awesome responsibility to use it properly. And so much of what I've sadly had to observe and occasionally comment on in many interviews and tweets and in Q&A with so many folks over the past 9 months is that the state of press freedom is not where it needs to be. Because the person who is the leader of the free world decided he's going to attack the very document that he's supposed to protect and defend. And that sends a worldwide signal, folks. When you do that, despots in name a country, North Korea, Nigeria, there are a ton of countries on the bad list for the World Press Freedom Index. And when the beacon of democracy says the press is bad, guess what happens to those journalists in those other countries? They get beaten, they get jailed, they get killed. Because, say, if Trump can do it, we can do it. And there's no consequences for that. And that's sad. Now, mind you, we're number 43 on the World Press Freedom Index, but doesn't make it feel any better when a good colleague from The Guardian, Ben Jacobs, gets body slammed by a now sitting member of Congress. Mr. Gianforte, did it with almost zero consequences. Almost. And sort of says, oops, I'm sorry. Really? That passes for civility when you're covering a congressional candidate? I mean, where do they do that? It's supposed to be some country that fill in the blank that's not the United States of America. And not that I would condone it anywhere else either, because I spent a lot of my time releasing statements and on the phone with diplomats and other folks and saying, please release insert name of journalist. Please stop beating up insert name of journalist. Please stop jailing insert name of journalist. And people around the world look to the National Press Club as sort of the 911 for journalists. So when I took that helm, I knew what I was getting into. I didn't like the environment I was stepping into, because when I first agreed to run for vice president a couple of years ago, I didn't know I was going to step into this sort of mess. But okay, fine. So the mess has been dropped on my lap. What are you going to do with it? Well, in Pittsburgh, when your room is dirty, you clean it up. When your house is dirty. Yes, I hear the Pittsburghese in the room. I didn't quite use that when I was coming. Mom didn't really go for that. But attacks on journalists are up 13%, folks, according to the World Press Freedom Index. The situation's getting worse, not better. And I'm wondering, I keep wondering, I know what oath I took. I keep wondering what the oath the other guy took. Because he and those, not just in this country, but now there's a lot of people around the world who have sort of caught on to the jig and say, hey, I'm going to do the fake news thing too. Well, let's talk about that for a moment. First of all, there's no such thing as fake news. It's either news or it's not. It's either facts or facts. Yes, it's important to have varied voices, different parties, rural, urban, black, white, you name it, all kinds of genders and perspectives. But there's a non-negotiable set of rules, road rules, you have to sign up for as a journalist. Principally among them, that facts are not debatable. You can disagree on a lot of things, but the sky is blue, water is wet, the law of the land applies to everybody, and numbers don't lie. Somehow, this is, Lewis Carroll would love this if he were alive today. We got a veritable Alice in Wonderland going here. Up is down, down is up, black is white, white is black. Proclaiming something that's demonstrably false, folks, is out of bounds. Being partisan in journalism is out of bounds. Trafficking, libel, slander, invective, whatever you want to call it, are just plain offsides, if you'll pardon the expression, since it's that time of year around here. There are a number of partisan, opinionated, sometimes libelous, slanderous, and websites that claim to provide quote-unquote information. It's kind of like, Mike Myers and Austin Powers news. It doesn't make them journalism. You can read them, it's fun. You can, whether it's Occupy Democrats or whether it's Red State or whether it's Breitbart and whatever you're looking at. These folks, it's fine to have those opinions, but they don't play by the rules we play by. So don't call them journalists. You can call them opinion, call them partisan, call them whatever you want, but they're not my colleagues. They shouldn't be yours. So somebody has to plant the flag and say, not everybody can be in the sandbox. Sorry. So when you look at that's sort of the state of civics and civility, we think we're a very smart nation, but it turns out, especially in the current environment, not so much. We just celebrated Constitution Day a few days ago in this country. And the Constitution Center in Philadelphia published a poll revealing that more than half of Americans believe that people in this country illegally have no protections under the Constitution. Now, if that weren't startling enough, only a quarter of Americans can successfully name all three branches of government. Now, would I have gotten out of Alderdice with that, Mr. Fisher? I don't think so. 1/3 of respondents unable to name a single branch. 27% who knew one branch, and 13% who knew two. You see where this is going. Roughly 48% of respondents named, more than 37% of respondents couldn't name a single specific right guaranteed under the First Amendment. And we wonder why we're being trolled. And we wonder why we're being threatened. And we wonder why we're being cyberbullied. And we wonder why folks, not everybody, we like to say the common expression, somebody's sitting in their underwear in their mama's basement tweeting away. Some of these guys are, working, in the best jobs in the country. They just believe, they embrace ignorance. Folks, that's scary. When less than half of the respondents say that they oppose the U.S. Congress forbidding the news media from reporting on any issue of national security without first getting government approval. They don't even understand the exceptions to the rules, let alone the rules themselves. What does this mean for us as journalists? And what it means is we have to do a much better job of reporting on civic issues, on helping people become re-engaged with what the basics of civics are, what a representative democracy is. We didn't sign up to be teachers, but guess what we have to be? But it also means we have to report on the educational system. It clearly wasn't what it was when Bill Fisher was principal. People don't know fundamentals. That should really sort of make you scratch your head a bit. Ignorance is killing us, folks, as a country. We have to shine a light on why that is the case. That's our job. Raise those critical questions. It's not a partisan thing. It's a country thing. It's a professional thing. I think about civility. I talked about that a little bit. There's a recent NPR, PBS Marist poll where 70% of Americans say that civility has gotten worse since President Donald Trump has taken office. If it's not bad enough that journalists are being threatened, harassed, cyberbullied, and everything else, our neighbors can't even talk to each other anymore. I'm sure Carla remembers when we were growing up, I could leave my bicycle on the porch overnight, and it would be there the next morning. Not so much anymore. I used to speak to my neighbors all the time. Mrs. Nesbitt, who owned the corner grocery store, and when I was growing up in Homewood, she and her husband knew all of us by name, knew where we lived. How many of you who have younger kids have store owners who could pick out every one of your children, know where they live, know what they're up to, know what their grades are? We have a country where people die trying to get into every single day. And yet, we can't stand each other. we're ignorant about the rules of the road for the country, and we're ignorant about how we're supposed to be, how we fit, how journalists fit in this whole scenario. People think free press is a threat to their opinion, a threat to their standing. Since when does telling the truth equal, well, you're nothing but, a flaming pile of garbage, or nothing but a big liar, or your subscriptions are down when they're up, your readership is down when it's up, your viewership stinks when it's way up. Saying things demonstrably false just is just running amok in our society. And, when we have in this city, which was once called the most livable city in America, remember that? According, I think Forbes magazine did that many years ago. When we have a problem where we can't talk to each other, when we can't respect the Constitution, when we can't respect the rule of law, we have to sort of change our strategy a bit, perhaps, as journalists. Part of that, I think, is becoming, and many of us are already doing it, is becoming a part of the communities in which we live. We have to be more than a byline, a disembodied voice on the radio, a wonderfully coiffed face on television. We have to be the soccer coaches, the Boy Scout leaders, the PTA folks, so that we're three-dimensional and that we learn from each other. It has mutual benefits. One, we'll get along better. Two, we have a sense of how to report better on our own communities because we know what our communities are up to instead of sitting in our newsrooms. Not to say all of you are doing that, but broadly speaking, some of us are not getting out enough. That's why some of us missed one of the biggest stories last year, why the electorate did what it did, because we weren't in the street enough. We weren't in the rural towns enough. We weren't out there enough to have our finger on the pulse, and that's why we got it wrong. So we have to fix that. When you sit in this role as club president, there are a lot of lessons you learn when you interview the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or the chairman of the NAACP or the chairman of the Freedom Caucus or Ken Burns or whomever comes through the halls of the National Press Club. Ranging from my celebrity crush, Misty Copeland, to House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows. I want to take a moment to focus on that because when you talk about civility and you talk about knowing each other, you talk about getting it right, before each headliner lunch, breakfast, or evening event, there's a sort of a little VIP reception for those reporters who are covering that issue, myself, and some of the other officers of the club. And then it sort of whittles down until it's just myself and that particular newsmaker. And when I was, as the old saying, as the sort of vernacular saying, I was chopping it up with Mark Meadows, I found out that he represented Asheville, and specifically Pisgah Forest. Now, my sister probably, a light bulb went off in her head, because guess what? Pisgah Forest is where my uncle Clentus Williams lives. Common ground is critical. How does the man who represents the most ardent right aspects of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives suddenly have a lot of laughs with a journalist because he represents my uncle? Makes it easier to beat up on him in the press club luncheon. But it makes it civil. That's what I'm getting at. If we learn more about each other, we can have civil dialogue, even if we don't agree, even if we don't like the questions. Mark Meadows didn't run out of the press club ballroom and then suddenly release a blaze of tweets saying how bad of a journalist I was. He said, let's get together for some barbecue. Let's have a cup of coffee, even though I don't drink coffee. It's fine. Maybe something stiffer. We have a bar at the press club. It's pretty famous. And I have an account, so I can buy. At least until January. But that's, whether we can disagree on whether the Carolina Panthers or the Steelers are a better team. Well, you know where I stand on that one. Just because someone takes you to task, it doesn't mean they hate you. And since talk about lessons learned these past 9 months, much has been made about former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's splashy and combative 8 months with us while representing the president. Did I approve of how he treated us? Absolutely not, and I said so. And I did so publicly, not just privately, but publicly. Do I think he's a spiteful, hateful, mean-spirited person that is great material for Saturday Night Live? Maybe great material for Saturday Night Live, but none of the other stuff. Because it turns out I've actually been acquainted with Sean for more than 20 years and watched his rise through the Republican ranks. I've had many drinks with him over the years. He's a really fun, honest, decent, for the most part, guy. Has a wonderful wife who happens to be a member of the press club because she's in the communications business as well. But you have to see beyond what they're doing. But it also gives you the window of opportunity to say, hey, let's have a private, civil conversation about how we elevate the conversation, how we create better understanding that some of the things you said and did aren't kosher, to be nice about it. I said things a bit much harsher if you check the Twitter feed. But, combat has its collateral damage, and sometimes you're going to say things that are a bit tough. But if you're testing access, if you're restricting access, in the case of what he did and what the president did through him, I'm not going to be silent on that. It ain't personal, it's business. And that business is the Constitution. That means the First Amendment and access and all of those things. Another lesson, road trips are valuable. As club president, I've spoken in many cities: Baltimore, Edgartown, Massachusetts, LA, Akron, Houston, New Orleans, and now here. Those trips reinforce that Washington, despite its crazy gyrations, is not the center of the universe. I've been asked a number of questions during these travels. One of them is a good one. Are we entering a golden age of journalism? A little early, but there are some very hopeful signs. When you look at the work of David Fahrenthold, who won a Pulitzer Prize, when you look at so many people, not just covering politics, but there are more important issues in the region. In our region, you're talking about. We're always talking about job growth. We always talk about economics. Uber and Google have a massive footprint since I've left this town. But there are consequences to that footprint. What's happened? Are we asking the questions about affordable housing? What kinds of jobs are being offered? What kind of taxes are you giving up in return to keep them here? My old middle school is gone because of Google. Florence Reisenstein, bye-bye. Where did those kids go? You have to ask those critical questions, even though the money looks really nice. So if there's anything that I've learned is that freedom of expression matters so much to so many of our colleagues from coast to coast. The simple act of being able to access information so you can be who you want to be, make decisions you want to make, so you can be a productive member of society. Everybody wants safe streets. Everybody wants good schools. Everybody wants, policemen who are not crooked or not engaged in police brutality. People want leaders they can trust, institutions they can trust. So now we're in a situation where we as journalists have a huge responsibility to making sure that we engage in solid reporting so people understand the institutions that they pay for, that they vote to uphold, and that of anything that as President Reagan used to say, trust but verify, but at least they can be trusted. We have a whole system, a whole climate now where they're trying to upend the whole sense of trusting nothing. And so people feel rudderless. They don't know where to go. We have to make sure they have the information so they can choose clear paths. Clarity is so critical in journalism. So that when whoever it is, a mayor, a city council member, the president, whoever is saying whatever they're saying, we do what we do best. They make a claim, we verify it. And therefore they look at both and say, okay, I can make a decision. You may proclaim something that doesn't make it true. I shouldn't be in a position where I don't trust the hospital I have to use or the school I have to send my kids to. I don't have any kids, but if I did, that'd be my questions. I do have a goddaughter, and she's just turning 2, but what happens when she's 10? What happens when she's 15? She has to grow up in a world guided largely by us as to what to do and how to get there. So those road trips are valuable for making sure that I relate to my members and to the whole profession to stay the course, to stay focused. Don't get rattled. We're going to be all right. The Constitution may bend, but it won't break. And we have a role in it, an explicit role in it. So don't let anybody tell you we don't have a part to do in building this country. It's literally written in the documents. So to that end, symbols matter. I've had to embrace that on multiple fronts as president of the press club. And yes, to some it's to have been the first African-American male since we were founded in 1908. Having talked about Simeon Booker, I talked about my inauguration, I talked about my beloved neighborhood of Homewood, and now we live in, my family lives in Highland Park, but we have to be able to tell those stories to make sure symbolically when they see somebody like me in the role, a kid from Homewood now needs to see this. I check on I read the Post-Gazette and the Courier regularly. My old neighborhood's very much left behind. What are you guys doing about it? What kind of reporting are you doing about that? To make sure that everybody has an equal shot about all this wonderful opportunity that's supposed to be coming to Pittsburgh. I make sure every time I'm home, I'm not going to be able to do it this time, that I drive through it to see what happened to it. And it makes me sad. I used to be able to play in those wonderful streets, and now there's half the neighborhood seems to be razed. No houses, no nothing. And that's depressing. What kind of reporting are we doing to make sure that people understand the fundamental responsibility to make sure that the whole city has to come along, not just some of it? In terms of symbols, I also think about a speech I gave in July to my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, which Mr. Fisher's a member, Brian Cook's a member, a good gentleman I just met in the back is a member. And I spoke at the Life Membership Breakfast. And after I was done, a man slightly younger than Mr. Fisher, came up to me, tears streaming down his eyes. And he hugged me, what seemed like an eternity. And I said, "What's wrong, brother?" And he said, "Brother Ballou, I just never thought I'd see somebody that looked like me in the role that you have. And I'm so happy and so proud. And I don't know you, but that's all I need to do. I just need to touch you. I just needed to hug you." Symbols matter, people. Those moments humble you real fast. If you think you're high and mighty, you think you have this wonderful title with a pretty temporary office, that tells you that how much further you have to go, how much energy you need to keep the fight going. Because what we do matters. Colleagues, journalism still matters. And when we're being assaulted the way we're assaulted, you have to stay calm in the pocket like Big Ben. But you have to have, we have to not just be calm in the pocket, but we have to be willing to block for our profession, hit like James Harrison if we have to defend it. Because the Constitution is that important. We have to be supremely accurate, and we have to provide perspective. There's a lot of people that, as I said earlier, that claim they're in the arena with us, but our responsibility in terms of press freedom, in terms of providing clarity, in terms of helping foster an environment of civility, is to make sure people know, have we been here before? Did this event happen before? What happened then versus what's happening now? To provide understanding. A smartphone camera or a tweet doesn't always do that. And I said we have to be accurate, supremely accurate, because so many people are saying we're fake now. We can't afford to screw up. One mistake is multiplied 1,000 times, and it takes even longer to clean it up. There are no shorter pretenders to the throne, folks. No shortage of pretenders to the hallowed space of journalism. Don't fall for the temptation for the splashy headline or skirting the rules just because you want more eyeballs, listeners, and viewers. Get out of the pack. The best stories are told from the ground up, and as I said earlier, where people actually live. Ask yourself, am I learning something from this piece of journalism that I'm doing? We say in my newsroom at Al Jazeera, go out and commit some journalism. Ask the hard questions. Provide understanding. You're not out there to hurt people. You're not out there to beat up somebody. You're out there to help people understand their role in this world. Now, we have to stand, and not just being accurate, you have to be able to stand on your work without fear or favor. Folks, as we now discover, get real angry at us for no good reason. You have to be able to shake it off. But you can't always shake that off. I mean, there's a human element to this. When you get cyberbullied, when you get called, when you get harassed, it takes a toll on us. I hear about it all the time, all over the country. So maybe newsrooms across different lines can come together and figure out a bit of self-care. How to deal with cyberbullying, how to deal with the harassment, employing the right professionals to help us cope with these sorts of things so we can get right back out there and do what we do best. Protecting freedom of the press, engaging this wonderful profession of ours, is no good if our minds are shattered, if our emotional state is through the floor. We're no good to anybody, including ourselves. So the biggest takeaway is that journalism will always matter. If you if you don't help people avail themselves of the information, if we don't avail ourselves of the proper information, if we don't vet our sources, if we don't help our readers, our viewers, our listeners how to vet what is news and what isn't, then we all subject ourselves to the consequences of it, and we're living those consequences right now. So if I'm here to tell you anything, is to get back out there. Keep fighting. Keep asking the good questions. Keep embracing what we do, because it's about the truth. The truth will always matter in the long run. Thanks. So I'm supposed to take some questions, huh? That's what we do in Washington in our club, so happy to take questions.
Hello. Is there any specific advice that you can maybe give? So since I work on the local level, and I have every day my journalists, my reporters will go out in the field and they'll call, and they'll be like someone who's harassed them, or maybe someone who's questioned their legitimacy, and I can like take some of those calls. Any particular advice that you could give someone who's in like a mid-level management position to give to people as every day they're dealing with these kind of microaggressions?
Well, as I indicated, I don't have all the answers. Let's just start there. But as I indicated, perhaps PXI can call the Courier, can call KDK, can call AURN, and all you all come together and say, maybe we can link arms with the local chapter of the American College of Psychiatrists or Psychologists or Counselors and say, do you guys have any pro bono services? Or maybe we can find a grant and get a hotline together to help our colleagues who are in the field taking it on the chin every day, how they can have a private way to be counseled and be managed. Maybe that's one way. Now, as far as the legitimacy, I don't have an answer for that. Except that we have to be exceptional at what we do. At the end of the day, as I said before, the truth will win out in the long run. The short run is not fun, and that's the nice way of putting it. But,
I like that about these, it's really psychology of it, because if somebody, or a reporter who's been doing it for a long time, and somebody's like, well, can I see your credentials, and what is this for, and I don't know if I trust you, I think that kind of gets to some of my veteran reporters, so I like the pro bono. Thank you.
It's one way. Anybody else? Harold.
Last couple of months ago at the NABJ in New Orleans, there was one seminar where some of the White House correspondents talked about what it used to be like covering the White House and what it's like now. And one of the things they said was, in prior administrations, maybe you get some guidance that the theme today is going to be such and such. You research that, and that's what you do. But in this environment, there may be that issue that day, but then he tweets something at 4 o'clock, and then somebody responds to it at 7 o'clock. So is the day, have you found it's just a kind of mayhem in terms of, you never know in news what's going to happen.
Right.
But
well, the nature of the cycle, the nature of the fact that, they can say once upon a time, it was a very structured day in the White House. But now we know that with the 24-hour news cycle, with so many other things in the pot, and with the advent of partisanship, frankly, on both sides, you're seeing that people want to hide the ball more. But maybe that just makes us work a little harder and do some real journalism, because one of the biggest criticisms of the White House beat is too spoon-fed. So, maybe that's a good thing. But there's another part of that, and that gets back to civility. There was a time in this town where there was a lot of offline get-togethers between White House officials and correspondents. Not everybody likes that. They say it's being too chummy, but it does take some of the edge off. when you're sitting around a dinner table at a local restaurant or privately at somebody's home, because nobody wants to always see us out together in that atmosphere. But the whole point of it is to be able to say, oh, he's more than Harold Hayes of KDK. He's more than John Roberts of Fox, or, name the correspondent. It's somebody who has a family, somebody who has values that I share. And maybe that sort of takes the temperature down a little bit. But like I said, we're in a brand new ball game here. Nobody knows where it's going. Anybody who says they know where it's going doesn't know what they're talking about. But that's also part of the fun. We're journalists. We do discovery. We'll be all right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned the rise of fake news and how troubling that is. I think most journalists would agree that one of the most fact-challenged newsmakers we have is the president. And a lot of news organizations, New York Times, Washington Post, among others, have taken to saying in their stories, this or that is a falsehood, or even a lie. And I was just wondering how you felt about that, what your own practices are.
Well, I guess you have to try to separate what we do, for example, at Al Jazeera versus what I'm thinking institutionally as the president of the press club. I think the latter is more important here. It's important that those who vote for the president, those who vote, period, we're all stakeholders. Every one of us. Regardless of who you vote for, the president belongs to everybody in the room. So, therefore, we therefore, as a community of journalists, have a responsibility to fact check and be that watchdog, to be that fourth branch of government. There used to be once upon a time where we loathed the notion of actually uttering the L word when it came to the President of the United States. I still cringe at it, to be blunt. But that doesn't mean we still can't do our jobs and say, the president asserted X, but this is what's really going on. And let the readers decide, let the viewers decide, let the listeners decide. And yeah, the president's going to blast us, but so what? We're discovering that, he does have the job. He's not going anywhere. Unfortunately, he has thin skin. But we can't let it get under ours. Tanae.
Yeah, but to follow up on that train of thought, which with the Pinocchios that gets to some stories he does, administration does, then does that mean that a lot of those stories, or even get to the level of coverage of those stories at all? Do some stories then rise to the occasion of getting coverage? Then those stories become bigger stories because they get coverage. Should they get any news at all? Should they get any type of coverage? Because I give it that again. Right.
For example?
For an example of him tweeting certain things. When he tweets, does that mean it's a story? Because he tweets, therefore it becomes a story? Should that become a news story? Is it news because he tweets?
But it gets to a fundamental thing. Before there was Twitter, the president would get behind a podium or release a statement. When the president utters opens his or her mouth, it is usually traditionally taken as policy.
Yeah.
This particular president uses Twitter. So therefore, it is by default policy.
Yeah.
It's the opinion of the President of the United States. It therefore matters. But we have a responsibility, as I said earlier, to put that into perspective. Has this statement been said before by any other president? What were the consequences then? What are the consequences now? Who's affected by all of this? You can't just say the president said X and just sort of leave it out there. You have to say the president said X. And compared to George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and Gerald Ford or whoever, when they went down this same road, this is what happened. Now, the president may come back in his own form and say, well, that's fake news. Well, that's for him. That's his prerogative to use the First Amendment. That doesn't make our jobs any lesser to be able to say, well, Mr. President, you said X, and here's the corroboration, because that's our job. We shouldn't be afraid to do our jobs. I hope that helps.
No, I understand it, I just wanted to get the discussion.
Okay.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Strategy to this discussion.
Mhm.
Is there any particular reason you picked this one?
I'm sorry? Why did I pick journalism?
What made you pick that?
Oh, goodness. I didn't wake up, I didn't sort of spend my early childhood wanting to be a journalist. But, in fact, I wanted to be an astronaut. Trigonometry and physics didn't quite agree with me, and I made a different decision. I wanted to be an Air Force Academy cadet. Didn't have what it took. I actually took an interview with the wonderful late Senator John Hines, just not too far from here. And he said, you have all these wonderful things, but we're not liking this science thing over here. He said, Jeff, we really like you, but I don't think you're going to be able to cut the mustard. Penn State got me instead. The rest is history.
Follow up on a little bit on today. Let's go back a year and a half or so ago during the campaign, and you had, 19 different Republican candidates, and there was one whose rallies got coverage. And go back to that time period, I recall the Huffington Post decided to cover the campaign as entertainment because he wasn't a serious candidate. And look what we have now. I mean, could it be said it's partially the media's fault?
Yes. Yeah. One thing that we have to be in our profession is own our mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes is treating someone who filed the paperwork as a sideshow. When you file the paperwork, you're a candidate, and you should be treated as such. But it's a little more difficult than that, because obviously the president was a highly unusual candidate, to say the least. This is a man who was already a television star, and he leveraged it. And that in and of itself is a story. You may not like what he does, you may love what he does, but you can't knock the brilliance. He wiped out 16 other folks and made it to the top. And 17 if you include Secretary Clinton. Can't knock the strategy. And that's a story. So the question, though, the other part of your question, though, is did the other 15 sitting aside the secretary suffer because of it? When you're in the newsroom and you're seeing all these feeds come in television, you're seeing all these rallies being covered in various ways, shapes, or forms. And the question, you're talking about questions of whether or not we should be too tied to poll data, whether we should be too, these are really good questions that have been examined since the election by minds smarter than mine. But there are a lot of folks who are saying we need to rethink how we cover presidential campaigns. How we redo that, jury's still out. But there's a lot of good thinking out there in Columbia Journalism Review and other trade thinking publications, Radio and Television News Directors Association, all those places that are saying, hey, let's talk about this. Let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how to be smarter about it, so that, I talked about making sure that lack of information has consequences. When you're not well informed about the entire field and where they stand, and a lot of our news organizations did do well by that, just to be fair. We didn't all blow it. But there's so much out there that people are figuring out, well, where do I pay attention? What's real, what's not? When you throw in all those pretenders to the throne, it causes confusion. So it's our job to create clarity in this confusion. Did we do it well enough? No. Hopefully we'll do better the next time. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of journalism is not glamorous, and it's just
Most of it isn't.
it's just a lot of hard work. But being the president of the National Press Club seems like a really exciting opportunity.
It's not glamorous.
Can you tell us, like, what's the most interesting experience you've
Darren
had?
thinks my board vice chair thinks it's glamorous.
You get a slick office.
I get a really nice office, but the president has to be a full-time journalist. I have a day job at Al Jazeera, you know. And when you're one of the news editors for the Americas, they're like, Jeff, that's really nice. You've got this sweet gig across town, but you still have to plan the coverage for North and South America. That's first. And then you can go play with your buddies across town and go beat up the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But, you know, take care of this first. You know, it's a nice thing. It's a wonderful honor. It's not something you know, as the other gentleman asked me, well, did I want to be a journalist all growing up? You know, I backed into this, to be honest. But I don't regret being here. When your colleagues look at you and they elect you to certain posts, it's because they believe in you. They think you can do something for them. They think, in this case, that you can protect them. You can advocate for them. That you can cheer for, you know, help raise scholarship money for future journalists. That they hope that you can ask the tough questions, whether it's about body image with Misty, global military strategy with Jim Dunford, whether it is you know, any number of policy things. It's a really nice thing to do. It helps me become a better journalist, helps me, you know, be an expert for a day in military strategy, an expert for a day in Food and Drug Administration policy, an expert. You get the picture. It's people, my predecessors warned me before I took the post. They said, don't forget to have fun. I haven't had a whole lot of fun in this, but because of the nature of the climate, but there are moments of fun. My members are great. My board is really smart. They make me look really good. And this is a moment in time, and I have to remind myself every day that because this is a special moment in time with this crazy climate, that I have a unique responsibility to provide absolute clarity to the entire planet on where the journalism profession stands. That's a really big deal, and that humbles you really fast. But I'm up for it. I'm a Pittsburgher. Right.
Thank you for being here. You've provided great insight today. But I do have a question as it relates to this. In part, I think you just answered some of it. But what role does celebrity of the journalist play in today's administering the news from the perspective that you think it should be? Has it been positive, negative, in terms of there's great journalists that are out there that has to be celebrities? How would you respond?
Well, profile, you know, whether it's good to be a high-profile journalist or not, it's a double-edged sword. I think sometimes when you're well in the news, like my good friend April Ryan, that has a lot of great doors that have opened for her, but it's also opened her up to a whole lot of harassment and a whole lot of abuse. We started on the White House beat together covering President Clinton, and I've watched her rise. And I've watched a whole lot of bullying and harassment, and Jerry could tell you all kinds of stories about whether or not they had to get the Secret Service involved, how to get, for protection. There's a not so cute side of being a high profile journalist. But it is help in her case, and in many cases, but not all, it's helping open doors so she can continue to ask the hard questions. So that when the president tries to put you on the spot and say, can you cut a meeting between me and the CBC, she can stand her ground and say, that's not my role, and still can press on with the issues of solid policy. That's what we do. We stick to our knitting, and we play through. I think that's it. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.